Something kept repeating my voice. And I have no idea if I'm losing my mind. I wasn't even sure if I should post this here. I thought about putting it in the Skinwalkers subreddit, but I don't think it fits that kind of story. To be honest, I'm not even sure what happened that night. Maybe someone here can tell me what they think. I don't really believe in ghosts, mimics, or anything paranormal, but this is the one experience I can't explain. It's been stuck with me for years, and to this day, I still get a little creeped out thinking about it. This happened a few years ago. My sister and her husband were going out of town for a short vacation and asked me to dog sit for them. I've done it plenty of times before, so I didn't think anything of it. They live in a nice, quiet neighborhood, and they've got a pretty comfortable house. Plus, I love dogs, and they have quite a few. Big dogs, small dogs, but mostly the big, fluffy, lazy kind that just like to sleep and get belly rubs. One of their dogs, though, is an elderly yellow lab named Lacey. She's sweet, but old. And by old, I mean she's nearly blind and mostly deaf now. You know the type. Her joints are stiff, she moves slow, and sometimes she gets confused when things aren't exactly how she remembers them. My sister's been really patient with her, and so have I whenever I've stayed over to watch the dogs. It's just part of the routine. I knew that this time, like all the others, I'd have to pay a bit more attention to Lacey, especially with her being anxious when my sister and brother-in-law weren't around. The first night was pretty standard. I got to their house around 7 p.m., fed the dogs, and made sure everyone had water. My sister had already left detailed instructions, but honestly, I didn't really need them. I've been through the drill many times before. The dogs settled down pretty quickly after dinner, all except Lacey. She was pacing a bit in the living room, her nails tapping against the hardwood floors, but I didn't think much of it. She always got a little antsy when my sister was away. I tried to comfort her by sitting down with her and petting her, talking to her in that soft, reassuring voice you use with elderly pets. "It's okay, girl. Everything's fine. We'll go to bed soon," I said. She seemed to settle a bit, though she still kept glancing toward the hallway, almost like she was expecting my sister to come walking through the door any minute. I thought it was just the separation anxiety kicking in. By the time 10 p.m. rolled around, I decided it was probably time to head to bed. My sister's bedroom was where Lacey usually slept, so I figured if I stuck to her usual routine, she'd calm down and get some rest. The house was quiet by then, with just the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of floorboards. The other dogs were already snoozing around the house, sprawled out in various corners or curled up in their beds. "Come on, Lacey, let's go to bed," I said, standing up and heading down the hallway to the bedroom. Lacey stayed where she was, still looking a little lost. She's slow to respond sometimes, and you can tell her hearing's almost completely gone. I walked back over to her and gently nudged her with my hand, trying to guide her toward the bedroom. "Come on, girl, go lay down," I repeated, this time a little louder so she might catch the sound. She hesitated but eventually started moving, her joints creaking with each step. I kept talking to her as we walked down the hallway, trying to keep my tone calm and soothing. "That's it, good girl. Time for bed." We reached the doorway to the bedroom, and I stood back, waiting for her to walk in ahead of me. Lacey stopped just short of the doorframe, like she was unsure about going in. I gave her another gentle nudge and said, "Go lay down, Lacey." And that's when I heard it. "Go lay down." It was a man's voice, clear as day, repeating my exact words. I froze, my hand still resting on Lacey's back. For a second I thought maybe I hadn't heard it right. The voice was so clear, so distinct. It wasn't a whisper or a muffled sound. It was like someone was standing right behind me, mimicking my command. I even turned around, half expecting to see someone there. But the hallway was empty. I stood there for a moment completely still, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that my sister and her husband had come home early. Maybe they had changed their plans and hadn't told me. That had to be it, right? But then I realized I hadn't heard the garage door open. They always used the garage to come in, and I would have heard it for sure. It's loud, not something you could miss. And on top of that, the other dogs hadn't barked or reacted at all. If someone had come through the door, they would have gone nuts, especially the little one, a yappy terrier who barks at just about anything. Lacey was still standing next to me, calm now, but she hadn't reacted to the voice either. I wasn't sure what to think. Maybe it was the TV. I hadn't turned it on, but maybe the sound came from somewhere else in the house, like an echo or something I hadn't noticed before. I walked over to the bedroom window, glancing outside at the driveway. My sister's car wasn't there. No lights, no sign of anyone else coming home. I took a deep breath and tried to shake it off. It had to be nothing. My mind was probably playing tricks on me, that's all. I'd been talking to Lacey out loud for the last few minutes. Maybe I'd imagined the voice. But I couldn't shake how clear it had been, like it was right there, only feet away. Still, I had to brush it off. Lacey needed to sleep, and so did I. I coaxed her the rest of the way into the bedroom, and she finally settled down on her usual spot next to the bed. I stood there for a moment longer, listening. The house was dead, silent again. Just like before, like nothing had ever happened. But I couldn't help the gnawing feeling that something was off. That voice, it was too real to be just in my head. I tried to ignore it, but the thought kept creeping back. As I got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to it. Something I couldn't explain, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. It had to be a trick of the mind, right? I wasn't the type to believe in ghosts or anything paranormal. But then again, I couldn't explain it either. For a while after hearing the voice, I just stood there in the bedroom, trying to rationalize what had happened. The house had gone back to being its usual quiet self, and Lacey was finally lying down, resting her head on her paws, eyes half closed. The other dogs were all out in the living room, completely oblivious to anything strange. But I couldn't shake it. The voice had been so clear, and it was undeniably a man's voice. I've replayed it in my head 100 times since then. Every time I do, I can remember it perfectly. Go lay down. In the same rhythm and tone I'd just used with Lacey, but deeper, and definitely not my own voice. I started pacing around the bedroom, my mind racing for an explanation. Maybe it was a neighbor? But no, that didn't make sense. My sister's house is pretty secluded. There's a yard, a fence, and a good amount of space between their place and the next. Even if a neighbor was outside, the windows were closed, and there was no way I'd hear someone that clearly through the walls. And besides, why would they repeat exactly what I said? Could it have been a radio somewhere in the house? A phone picking up some weird signal? I know it sounds ridiculous, but I was grasping at anything that could make this situation make sense. Nothing fit. Still, I tried to let it go. I climbed into bed, trying to ignore the nagging feeling creeping up my spine. The bed was comfortable enough, and Lacey seemed calm now, but the house felt too still. The kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of every creak and rustle. I closed my eyes, telling myself it was just my imagination. I'd been alone in the house for a few hours, and sometimes your mind just messes with you, right? I had almost convinced myself to go to sleep when I heard it again. This time, something quieter, but just as unsettling. A low, faint shuffling sound, like someone walking down the hallway outside the bedroom. I opened my eyes and listened, my heart picking up speed. The sound was soft, irregular. At first, I thought maybe one of the other dogs had gotten up to wander around. They do that sometimes, restless during the night, just like Lacey. But the more I listened, the more it sounded wrong. The footsteps were too slow, too deliberate. It wasn't the usual quick patter of a dog's nails on the floor. It sounded heavier, like the weight of a person. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more clearly. The shuffling paused for a moment, and then nothing. just the dead silence of the house again. I waited, trying to breathe slowly and quietly, hoping to hear it again. After what felt like an eternity, I got out of bed. Lacey lifted her head slightly, watching me, but she didn't move. If there was someone in the house, she wasn't reacting to it. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, its screen casting a dim glow in the otherwise pitch-black room. I hesitated at the bedroom door, wondering if I was really about to walk out into that dark hallway. My rational side was telling me it was just one of the dogs. Maybe I was overreacting to the voice earlier, and now I was jumping at shadows. But that small part of my brain, the part I didn't want to admit was freaking out, was screaming at me not to open the door. Eventually, I took a deep breath and stepped out into the hallway. It was dark, but my phone's light illuminated the wooden floors. Everything looked just as it had earlier, no sign of anything or anyone. I glanced over at the living room where the other dogs were curled up, fast asleep. They hadn't moved. I stood there for a minute, trying to listen for any other sounds. The house was completely still. Not a single creak, not a single rustle. Nothing. I felt a bit foolish at this point. My nerves were clearly getting the better of me. The voice, the shuffling sounds. It was all probably in my head. I've never been a big believer in the paranormal, but maybe I'd been listening to too many creepy stories. Or maybe being in a quiet, dark house just makes you more sensitive to every little thing. I was just about to turn back toward the bedroom when I heard it again. The voice. Go lay down. This time it wasn't coming from behind me. It was in front of me, farther down the hall, near the kitchen. The same man's voice, the same words, repeated back to me. But I was sure, absolutely sure, there was no one there. My pulse skyrocketed, and I froze. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I stared down the dark hallway, squinting into the shadows near the kitchen. But there was nothing. No figure. No movement. Just the voice, hanging in the air for a moment. And then, silence. I didn't know what to do. The rational part of me, which had been holding on by a thread, finally started to crumble. My brain was scrambling to come up with explanations, but none of them made sense. It couldn't be a neighbor, it couldn't be the TV, and it sure as hell couldn't be me hearing my own voice echoed back. There was no one in the house. There couldn't be. I took a shaky breath and backed up slowly, inching toward the bedroom. My phone light bounced off the walls as my hand shook. I turned around and hurried back into the bedroom, closing the door behind me and locking it. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I didn't know what else to do. Lacey was still lying by the bed, looking up at me with her tired, cloudy eyes. She didn't seem bothered by anything that was happening, which almost made me feel worse. Shouldn't she be barking? Shouldn't she be scared, too? Or was she just too old and tired to care? I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up around me like a kid trying to hide from the monsters under the bed. I kept my phone clutched in my hand, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The house fell into silence again. That unnerving kind of silence that's louder than any noise. For the rest of the night, I didn't hear the voice again, but I didn't sleep much either. Every creak of the house, every small noise made my heart jump. I lay there for hours, waiting for the voice to come back, waiting for something, anything, to make sense of what had just happened. But all I got was silence. The morning came slower than it should have. I don't think I slept more than an hour in total that night, every sound of the house keeping me on edge. I felt more exhausted than relieved. Lacey had slept through the night, unaffected by whatever had happened, and the other dogs were still lazily sprawled out in the living room when I finally left the bedroom. The house was quiet, eerily so. But now with the daylight coming in, it felt more like it had before. Normal. Familiar. Whatever had happened last night seemed to dissolve with the dark. Still, I couldn't shake the tight knot in my stomach. I was trying to tell myself it was nothing, just a bad night. Maybe even a dream that I half remembered. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I made coffee, trying to focus on something tangible, something routine. As I stood in the kitchen, stirring sugar into my mug, I found myself glancing down the hallway, where I had heard the voice for the second time. It was stupid. I knew that. There wasn't going to be anyone there. There couldn't have been. Yet, the urge to check nagged at me. After a few minutes of pretending like I wasn't bothered, I gave in and walked over. The house was still quiet, just like it had been all night. I reached the end of the hallway, right where the voice had seemed to come from. I stopped, took a deep breath, and then slowly looked around. The kitchen, the living room, the door to the garage, all the same, all empty. I felt a wave of frustration. There was nothing here. I was searching for something that wasn't there, something I had probably imagined. I even started to convince myself that it really was just my mind playing tricks on me. I'd stayed up late, stressed over taking care of the dogs and making sure everything was in order while my sister was away. It made sense. I was just tired. As I started to turn away, something caught my eye near the door to the garage. Just a small detail I hadn't noticed before. There was a smudge of dirt, or maybe dust, on the wall beside the doorframe, right about shoulder height. It was faint, almost invisible, but now that I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I walked over, my heart picking up speed again. The smudge was small, maybe the size of a handprint, but it didn't look like any of the dog's marks. It looked human. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at it for what felt like forever, my mind racing back to the voice, to the footsteps I'd heard in the hallway. I reached out, hesitating for a moment before running my fingers along the smudge. It wasn't just dust. It was gritty, like dried mud. I pulled my hand back, my mind struggling to make sense of it. It didn't make sense. The garage door hadn't opened, and no one could have gotten in without me knowing. I would have heard the dogs barking. I would have heard the door. But there it was, clear as day. Someone had been standing here. I stepped back, my pulse racing again, a heavy feeling settling in my chest. The logical part of me still wanted to explain it away. Maybe it was old, maybe it had always been there, and I'd just never noticed before. But I knew my sister's house. I knew every nook and cranny, and that smudge hadn't been there the last time I stayed over. I didn't know what to do. Calling someone seemed over the top. What would I even say? That I heard a voice and found a dirty mark on the wall? It sounded ridiculous, even in my own head. But the fear clung to me, nagging at the back of my mind, telling me that whatever happened last night wasn't just my imagination. Eventually, I decided not to tell my sister, at least not right away. She would just worry, and I didn't want to come across as paranoid. She had enough on her plate, and I could already hear her telling me it was nothing. Just a trick of the mind. The house settling. The dogs. But it didn't feel like nothing. I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched, of something lingering just out of sight. I finished my coffee, trying to shake off the unease that hung over me. Lacey, as usual, had taken her spot by the back door, sunbathing in the patch of light that filtered through the window. She seemed peaceful, unaware of everything. I sat down on the couch, staring at her, trying to absorb her calmness. But as the hours passed, something kept bothering me. The way the voice had said those words, "Go lay down," exactly as I had. It wasn't just an echo or a random sound. It was deliberate. It had repeated me. I started to wonder, what if it hadn't been a threat? What if it was something else? I couldn't say for sure, but a small part of me started to think that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't trying to scare me. Maybe it was trying to help. After all, the voice had only come after I was trying to comfort Lacey, like it was mimicking me to calm her down, too. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Was it possible that whatever had been in the house wasn't malevolent? but something trying to help in its own strange, unsettling way? I still don't know. I finished the dog-sitting job without any more strange events, and my sister came back a few days later. I never told her about the voice, or the handprint, or any of it, but every time I think about it, a part of me wonders if it's still there, watching over the house, waiting for someone else to speak so it can repeat them. I haven't stayed there since, not because I'm scared, exactly, but because I'm not sure I want to know what it really was. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was something else entirely. I'll never know for sure. But whenever I think about that voice, I can't help but wonder, what if it wasn't trying to hurt me at all? I've replayed that night over and over again, trying to make sense of it. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that some things just don't have an explanation. Maybe I'll never figure it out. And maybe that's okay. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't the ghost or the mimic or whatever it was. Sometimes it's just not knowing.